Hi, my name is Jesus Esparza.
And I'm Erick Martinez.
And I'm Valeria Cabarros, and on today's show, we're going to be talking about the effects of sucking CO2 out of the air and the effects it would have on global warming.
Since the Industrial Revolution, there has been a change in the process balance of CO2 produced by burning fossil fuel for heat, transportation, and manufacturing, and it has upset the balance between in the CO2 in the carbon cycle. Humans have been releasing CO2 from these fuels more quickly than it can be reabsorbed naturally into the carbon cycle, resulting in high levels of CO2. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has gone up by 40% since 1750.
Based on a study done in 2016 in Mauna Loa, Hawaii, it's safe to say that since the Industrial Revolution, the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere has increased from 280 parts per million to 400 parts per million. Therefore, the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere has increased dramatically.
CO2 is a greenhouse gas. It traps the sun's energy as it strikes the earth, warming the atmosphere. An increase in CO2 can increase temperatures, furthering causing change in weather patterns.
The real question is, can CO2 really be sucked out of the atmosphere?
I believe it actually
Well,
can.
it's much cheaper to perfect carbon capture directly at fossil fuel plants and keep CO2 out of the air in the first place.
But CO2 can be contained. Okay, we can suck CO2 out of the atmosphere because CO2 is constantly being sucked out of the atmosphere by the natural carbon sinks on the planet. Have you forgot that the ocean is a natural carbon sink of the planet? I mean, it only contains about 26% of the CO2 in the atmosphere. Not to mention that plants contain about 28% of the carbon dioxide on the planet, and the atmosphere only contains about 44% of it.
Okay, but even though CO2 can be contained by oceans, when plants and animals die, they will eventually release it back into the atmosphere.
Okay, but we can fix that problem. I like this method called, ocean fertilization. It's quite simple. All you do is just dump iron oxide into the oceans, and in effect, it'll increase the growth of plankton in the oceans. Now, as we know, plankton is a plant in the sea that is able to photosynthesize. So therefore, it'll take all the carbon dioxide in the oceans and convert that to oxygen by the process of photosynthesis. Therefore, and studies have shown that 10% of the carbon dioxide has decreased in the oceans. So that 26% goes into a 16% of carbon dioxide found in the oceans. Then the process repeats as all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere goes out into the oceans. Therefore, carbon dioxide is constantly being depleted.
Your plan may benefit the plankton. It affects every other organism, which once again affects the CO2 released in the oceans, because those organisms affected will die, and like I said, they will eventually release CO2 back into the air. And to grow phytoplankton, it takes in these nutrients, fixing them in their tissues. So they deplete surface waters not only of carbon, but also of nutrients that support all of the ocean's food webs.
Well, now it's going to be very difficult because the United States has signed off from the Paris Agreement Act. On July 21st, 2017, the U.S. withdrew from the Paris Agreement Act.
Since you guys were mentioning the Industrial Revolution, since the Industrial Revolution, the acidity of our oceans has risen by 30%, which rises pH levels. When science is talking about a marine ecosystem that is at risk, these fish and coral reefs will have trouble adapting to acidic waters. Which is Jesus?
Wow, I agree with you. For example, the coral reefs, they have yet to adapt to the CO2 levels in our ocean. They are dying off because the zooxanthellae is leaving their the coral reef, which is leading them to become bleached.
Okay, but we can fix that because it's not just ocean fertilization we can talk about. We can also talk about the ocean liming. Okay, it's quite a simple process.
Okay, wait. Dumping a bunch of things in the ocean, doesn't it already seem like a freaking terrible idea?
No. Listen. Okay, we're just dumping lime into the ocean. This therefore causes the lime to react to the carbon in the ocean. This therefore creates calcium carbonate, also known as limestone. All we're doing in this process is therefore we're trapping all the carbon into the form of a solid, which we already know as limestone. So therefore, all the carbon dioxide in the ocean is being solidified, and there.
Okay, but the CO2 that is dissolving in the seawater reacts with water to produce a weak acid or carbonic acid, as we all know. This lowers the pH. Thus, ocean acidification is the decrease in the pH of seawater, which harms all sea animals. Okay, so there is other ways to suck the CO2 out of the atmosphere, despite his terrible ocean ways. Okay, but the total system cost for air capture could be as much as 1,000 per ton of CO2, or about 10 times the cost of carbon removal at a fossil fuel plant. The cost for air capture of CO2 is high, partly because CO2 is diffused in the air, while it is more concentrated in the stream from a fossil fuel plant. In 2015, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine released a report saying climate intervention technologies like air capture were not a substitute for reducing emissions. Last year, 2 European scientists wrote in the journal Science that air capture and other negative emissions technologies are an unjust gamble, distracting the world from viable climate solutions. I just want to point out that technology-wise and your first ideas like ocean-wise and stuff, it cannot suck up the rough 36 billion tons of CO2 that we emit each year. Nor does it address other greenhouse gases like methane. And even scaling up to a target of 1 billion tons of captured CO2 each year would be a massive task, almost impossible. And also the finding places to put all that carbon.
This is Esparza. We'll be signing off.
And this is Erick Martinez.
This is Valeria Cabarros, and we want to leave you with a question.
Can sucking CO2 halt the effects of global warming?
That's
Leave
it
in
for
the comment
today.
below.
Bye.
Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, comment, share.